And we are very happy to welcome Alex Wolf from Scenic Hudson to talk about his solar mapping tool. And I will turn it over to you, Alex.
Okay, thank you. Thanks everybody for joining us today. For those of you that aren't familiar with Scenic Hudson, we are a nonprofit environmental advocacy organization as well as a land trust, and we work in the Hudson Valley from just north of New York City all the way up to the federal dam at Troy, so the entire Hudson River Valley and the Hudson River estuary. And the picture you're seeing here is Storm King Mountain, which is sort of one of the most scenic and iconic places along the Hudson River. And Scenic Hudson got its start opposing a pump storage reservoir that they were going to build on Storm King. This was initially proposed back in the 60s. And so we have a long history of dealing with power projects and plans. But we also, work hard to have a positive impact and promote smart growth principles throughout the valley to make the Hudson Valley a great place to live and work. Today I'm going to be talking about our solar mapping tool, which we've created in the last year or so. And as I mentioned, we got our start saying no to some power projects. And so some folks may be wondering, why is a land trust or an environmental organization promoting development of solar? But we've come to realize that climate change is really a threat to our mission. And it threatens a lot of the farms and the natural spaces that we've conserved in the Hudson Valley. And so our vision is to make the Hudson Valley a regional model for a swift and just transition to renewable energy. And we want to make sure that this happens while we also conserve ecological, agricultural, and cultural resources in the Hudson Valley. There is some wind development going on in New York State, but the wind resources in the Hudson Valley are not great. And so we know that solar is going to be the primary renewable resource that's being developed in our region. So how do we make sure that we can get solar sited and built without jeopardizing all of the other resources that we've been working so long to conserve? To address that, we've started our HowToSolarNow program, which is a toolkit to provide stakeholder decision-making support in the interest of making the Hudson Valley this regional model. And we have three main parts, tools in the toolkit thus far. We have a guide to solar siting, a guide to solar zoning, and then the solar mapping tool, which we developed with support from the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation. And that'll be the focus today, as that's our GIS-based tool. And all these things are available at howtosolarnow.org. So the solar mapping tool, we've developed this as an educational resource to guide exploration and prioritization and to inform the conversation. We're seeing a lot of solar proposals being put forth and meeting a lot of opposition from local stakeholders. And so we hope that the solar mapping tool can help solar developers and local stakeholders have a common starting point for discussions and have the same information in front of them so that we can move solar projects forward quickly, but also responsibly. So we envision that the solar mapping tool is going to help support comprehensive plans and zoning for solar, help communities and developers assess a site for potential solar development. And we also envision that it may be used to help communities set renewable energy goals and develop climate action plans going forward. We started development of the solar mapping tool by soliciting input from a variety of different stakeholder groups, as you see here. We assembled stakeholders and met with all of them back in November of 2019. And we also pilot tested the solar mapping tool with 2 Hudson Valley communities, the towns of Chatham and Lloyd, as we were developing it. And we got feedback from those communities as to how best to make the tool useful for them. We've organized all of the data layers in the solar mapping tool into these layer groups. As I'm sure all of you are aware, there are so many data layers out there available for use. And so we sort of had to go through a winnowing process and a mental organization process to get all of our layers, figure out what was going to be in the tool and what wouldn't be. So here are the layer groups, and I'll touch on those again a little bit later. And we sort of applied some criteria to which layers we were actually going to use in the solar mapping tool. we wanted this tool to really be useful at the municipality scale, so at townships, cities, villages, and so we wanted scale appropriate layers. So, not too fine scale, not too coarse scale. There are plenty of data sets that cover the entire nation and are really too coarse by the time you zoom into a township. We wanted layers wherever possible with regulatory status, and that was something we heard from municipal stakeholders, is that they needed to be able to back this up as to why they were focusing on certain layers that were in the tool. So for instance, having DEC mapped wetlands, having that layer in the tool was important to some of our municipal stakeholders. We wanted layers with clear relations to solar development issues. Again, so many data layers out there, and lots of them might be interesting to me personally. But if we couldn't draw a clear line between why this layer was important for thinking about solar development, it didn't go in the tool. We wanted this tool to be really accessible to non-GIS users, to non-experts. So some of our intended audiences are folks who are volunteering on zoning boards, planning boards, conservation boards for municipalities, who may or may not have a background in any of these issues. So we wanted to break it down and make sure that everybody was meeting each other on the same plate, at the same place. And likewise, we've seen some solar developers who are good engineers, are good business people, but don't know anything about ecology or farming. And so we wanted everybody to be able to understand all of the layers in this map and why they're important. There are some resources that have multiple possible layers to use. So for example, agricultural soils, there are several different layers out there that you might use. And we talked to our agricultural stakeholders about which one best represented their interests and which one was most interpretable to somebody who's not an agricultural scientist, a soil scientist, or a farmer. And so we tried to pick the single best layer to represent soils, the single best layer to represent forests. And really, again, making this tool accessible for everybody. We also, as much as possible, tried to choose layers that were not specific to our local area. There are a few in the tool, but most of the layers are available either statewide or nationally, so that folks outside of the Hudson Valley can use this tool as a model to make a tool for their own region. Because we, again, love to see renewable energy getting sited quickly but responsibly throughout the state, throughout the country. So the solar mapping tool is, it's web-based. It operates in a browser. Anybody can use it. Again, you don't have to be a GIS user. It's based on Esri's story maps. That's the main platform for it. The tool covers an immense amount of material, and so we ended up breaking it into 4 different parts. And parts 1 through 3 are really educational in nature. They're providing people with explanation and background. And part 4 is a fully functional GIS that anybody can use to look at these layers. So I'm just going to go through the parts quickly and explain what each of them is in brief. Part 1 is really background about the types of solar energy that folks are likely to see in New York State and the Hudson Valley. And throughout the solar mapping tool, we have these dark blue buttons for what we call info dives. So folks can click on that and then scroll down on the right side of the screen and learn more about the particulars of solar energy systems if they're not familiar with them already. If they are familiar, they can scroll down on the left side here and keep moving. We also have light blue quick help buttons. So for instance, here we're talking about the sizes of solar developments that we're likely to see here in the Hudson Valley. And we find that a lot of people, and this was certainly true of me when I started this project, I didn't have a sense of the difference between 25 kilowatts versus 25 megawatts. What does that look like on the ground? Solar projects are usually put in terms of kilowatts, megawatts, and a lot of people don't know what that looks like when it's actually built. So here we have examples, and a user can, for instance, click on this button here and actually see what a 2 megawatt project looks like with the Catskills there in the background for reference. And so we have examples of several different size classes here. Part 2 of the solar mapping tool is about smart solar planning. And when we started this project, we I think started talking with developers and approaching it from the aspect of solar feasibility. Where can you build solar? Where are the best places for solar? And we eventually came back to the smart growth principles that we rely on. And responsible land use planning, and we came at it from a land use planning perspective. And so my colleague, Audrey Friedrichsen, who is a land use planning attorney, came up with these 4 steps of smart solar planning. And those are to assess existing land use patterns, find solar opportunities, the low-hanging fruit, identify locations that avoid negative impacts as much as possible to valued resources, and then finally to see which of those sites are most feasible for solar. And the reason that we want to go in this order is we want again, responsibly sited projects that hopefully will move through the approval process, the siting process more quickly. And so starting with, where is it a good fit for our town or our city? What are the resources we want to make sure are not impacted or protected adequately. And it's possible to create comprehensive plans and zoning that steers solar to places where people are comfortable with it being before the infrastructure is necessarily there. And so that's why we put evaluating solar feasibility last in terms of the 4 steps here. Although it is incredibly important, all these steps are. We talk about the benefits of why you would want to use the smart solar planning approach. And we also have an info dive on energy justice, talking about what that is. It's related to environmental justice, if folks have heard of that. Because again, we want not just a swift transition, a responsible transition, but also a just transition to renewable energy. Finally, in part 4, we tell people what else they need. The solar mapping tool covers the entire Hudson Valley. It covers 11 counties. So it wasn't feasible for us to pull, for instance, the zoning GIS layers for every single township and city in our coverage area. And so folks need to bring those things to the table. And we also want them to bring their knowledge of local on-the-ground conditions, of their local community, and also their community values and priorities. There are some places in the Hudson Valley that are quite urbanized. There are some places that are very rural. There are some places that rely on agriculture for their economy, that rely on natural resources and ecotourism for their economies. And so we've seen some groups take an approach with GIS where they create a model and prioritize sites. And we didn't want to pick specific sites for the Hudson Valley, but rather give local stakeholders the tools that they need to prioritize and to pick their own sites based on their community values. Part 3 we call Learn About the Layers, and part 3 is structured based on the 4 steps of smart solar planning. But we basically run through every layer in the solar mapping tool one by one and explain what that layer is, how to look at it on a map, and how it relates to solar energy specifically. And to help people kind of keep track of this, because part 3 is quite long and covers every single layer in detail, we provide a downloadable worksheet that folks can print out or put in a word processor and take notes so that as they go through part 3, they can write down what they're learning. Maybe they see an interesting site on the map of their town. They want to return to that when they get to part 4, so they can take notes on it with the worksheet. So step 1, as I mentioned, of smart solar planning is assessing existing development patterns. And so we put up a national land cover data set here on the map. I'm sure as GIS users, many of you are familiar with this. Of course, not everybody in our intended audience is going to be familiar with land cover maps. And so we provide an info dive that teaches folks in a nutshell how to look at this map and learn about their community, how to see the patterns in development, how to see where the agricultural or forest core areas are, transportation corridors, et cetera. So once they've sort of looked at their town as a whole and kind of thought about what the development patterns are and where they see the future of their municipality or their community, where they want to see agriculture continue or where they think solar is more or less appropriate, then they can start looking at step 2, so identifying these solar opportunity areas. And for this section, we have 3 layers that are really sort of, again, these low-hanging fruit, these places where we believe that solar can be sited with very minimal impacts to any of the other resources that are already in the community. So the EPA has actually compiled a data set, a layer of what they call repowering opportunities. And these are a combination of federal and state designated remediation sites. So landfills, Superfund sites, places like that. And we are able to stream that layer into our map. So this is coming from the EPA, and they have a great attribute set that goes attributes that go with these points. And they actually have hyperlinks built into the attribute data. So you can see the site remediation status. So you'll actually link through to the DEC page that tells you what a site was remediated for. And in some cases, they'll actually tell you things like contaminated ground, right here under site health assessment, contaminated groundwater is not used for drinking or other purposes. So this might give you an idea of a site, former industrial site that has been remediated to some degree, but maybe not the best place to put a school or housing, might be a very good place for solar. And EPA has also done some high-level screening, and you can click through to the EPA site and see how many megawatts they think might be suitable for this site and other great data. So a wonderful data set from EPA, and we're able to stream it into our map. Landmines, that's a DEC data layer. Obviously, another great place to put solar. You can see a big pit mine right here. These places have already been heavily impacted by mining and are often remediated to some degree, but this can be another great place to put solar. They're often leveled, they're cleared of trees, other things that make them great for solar and not so great for a lot of other land uses. The final layer in here is our large building footprints. This was actually Microsoft created this data set, and Esri now sort of curates it and provides it. So another data set that we're able to stream in, and that has nationwide coverage. And we wanted to find impervious surfaces, including parking lots. We weren't able to find a data layer that had enough resolution to really represent that. But of course, where you have large buildings, you tend to also have large parking lots. And so as an example, we're looking at the town of Poughkeepsie here, and we can see that there's a 17-acre building in the southern township there. And users can actually zoom in part 3. Part 3 has fully interactive maps, so they can zoom in and out, they can search. They can zoom in and see that this is actually a mall, and there are several other huge retail sites here. And within this blue box, there's about 150 acres of rooftop and parking lot. So that's a large amount of impervious surface where you could potentially put solar and still have the existing land use. So you can put solar on roofs, you can put solar canopies over parking lots. It still functions as a mall, it still functions as retail space, but now you've added solar without taking away any green space or anything like that. So great opportunity. Part 3 is identifying least conflict areas, or identifying your valued resources in your community that you want to avoid negatively impacting, things like agricultural sites, wetlands, etc. And we've sort of collected these in a bunch of different categories, and it's not always a zero-sum game. So in other words, there are lots of opportunities to co-locate solar and agriculture in the same area, and you don't necessarily need to lose a lot of agricultural land to site solar. And we have another info dive that goes into some of the details on that and provides additional resources. We do have our one soil data layer here that folks can view. And so here I've selected the town of Clinton just as an example. And we also provide a table of acreages of these soil classes by township. And so the user, not only can see where in their town these agricultural soils are, but if they click through to the table, they can see how many acres of these soils there are. And that helps put things into context. So if a solar project is proposed that's going to take, say, 200 acres of agricultural soils out of production for the term of the lease, which is usually 25 or 30 years, what proportion of your agricultural soils are you then taking out of production? And users can sort of get into the details on that and put these maps into perspective for them. We have one of our few regional data sets is forest cores and edges. And actually, this was originally developed for the Hudson Valley, but I believe there's now a statewide version of this. This comes from the Natural Heritage Program and the Hudson River Estuary Program, both connected with DEC. And so we give people the layer. We talk about the benefits of forests in general. We tell them a little bit more about the layer in this info dive here. And then we sort of connect this layer to the trade-offs between clearing trees and building solar. We touch on wetlands and flood zones as well. And again, we sort of provide some quick definitions with this quick help button, or a more in-depth info dive on floodplains, which are again sort of a nuanced topic when it comes to solar. There are some instances where it might be a good solution in, say, an urbanized area to put solar in a floodplain. But when you have intact natural floodplains, you would not want to put solar there. So we get into that in the info dive as well. So finally, we come to addressing solar development feasibility in step 4 of the 4 steps of smart solar planning. We used a digital elevation model, a DEM, to create this slope and aspect suitability for solar layer. And this is the only layer that we created specifically for the solar mapping tool. Like I said, it's based on a DEM, and it's a combination of south-facing slopes and flat areas. And we talked to solar developer stakeholders as we were developing the criteria that you see over here for what's most feasible and least feasible. And this is a pretty broad scale layer. It's a little bit coarser. I would have loved to make it a bit finer scale, but we did the best we could with the DEMs available. But users can get a sense of where in their town are going to be the flatter or the more southerly facing slopes that they're able to put solar. Hosting capacity. This is another really important criterion for siting solar. And hosting capacity deals with the distribution lines, the electrical distribution lines. And we have a picture of those that people can enlarge in the story map and sort of remind themselves. So these are the smaller poles that go from a substation to your house or to your place of work and bring you power. And these distribution lines have a capacity, the hosting capacity. So basically, how much more extra space on a given line is there to add solar capacity to that line? And users can click on line segments and get attribute data on these. This is a bit more of a technical topic. So again, we've provided an info dive here that gets into kind of the nitty-gritty of how to use the interface, where to click, and how to read the numbers that you're getting. And these data are available from the electrical utilities. The state has mandated that they're made public, so each utility has its own web-based mapper. And we worked extensively with the utilities to be able to stream 5 different utilities' data into the solar mapping tool. And luckily, everybody was based on an Esri platform, so it worked out. Now, the bigger lines are transmission lines. These are sort of the huge high voltage lines that you see around the landscape. And they're important if you're going to go for a larger scale, utility scale solar project. So the hosting capacity lines tend to be community solar, rooftop solar, things like that. The really big projects go on these transmission lines, and so we have them mapped as well. So finally getting to part 4, after we've given everybody all of this information, they basically get to play with the data as they like. This is a fully functional GIS system. It's hopefully user-friendly. We have layer groups down at the bottom here. We have widgets like measure and draw, so you can outline a site, something like that. You can change base maps. And we do give people a guide here in the tool and functions quick help. If they click that, this page pops up and tells them what all these things are. We also link to our help file, the HowToSolarNow homepage, etc. So I mentioned earlier, we have these layer groups. And again, people can click on this quick help and it'll bring up this graphic here, which reminds them what all these icons are. And so if you hover over it in the tool, it'll also tell you. So here are solar opportunity layers. I can click that. A user can click that and bring up layers, and they can turn them on and off at will. So this basically puts all of the layers at users' disposals, and they can turn on and off layers. They can do visual overlays. They can zoom into a site. They can draw the outline of the site. They can measure acreages. And they sort of have the full capability of GIS at their disposal in a web browser. We also, if they scroll down on the left-hand side of the screen here, we provide a few examples. And so these are basically suggestions of what to think about and which layers to turn on at once. So obviously people can go in and turn on 20 layers and it turns into a big tie-dye mess and you can't really learn anything. And so we suggest to people, try turning on this layer and that layer at once, or try turning on these 3 layers at once to think about this issue or that issue. And along the way, we provide more guidance for using measure tool, for referencing layer groups. Again, hosting capacity is a bit of a complex topic, but really important for siting solar. So we link back to our info dive so people can get help. And so we're really trying to guide people through a learning process and help them explore these issues, explore their town and maps of their town with different layers turned on and off, and let them come up with their own right answer for where solar should and shouldn't go in their community. Sorry. So sort of just as a reminder, finishing up, and I do want to leave lots of time for questions. The solar mapping tool, again, is really intended to inform the discussion. It's intended to bring solar developers and local stakeholders together and provide a common starting point for discussions about the best places, the most responsible places to site solar. We're trying to distill a lot of complex information. And so we've had to sort of be a little bit brief and fairly high level with a lot of these topics. But again, we've created those info dives for people that want to learn more. We've put a lot of diverse data sets in one place. As I mentioned, we only created one of these data sets ourselves, and it's based on DEMs. So basically, all of this data is publicly accessible. Most of it is already in an online mapper in one place or another, but we try to bring lots of diverse data sets together and winnow it down to the data sets that really apply directly to thinking about solar and solar issues. Again, we're not providing concrete answers. We're not replacing local knowledge. Folks have to know their communities well. We can't really replace site-specific assessments, or we don't want to replace the project review process, so seeker or Article 10. Those regulatory siting processes still need to happen, but we're hoping that when applications go in, they will have already been well thought out. They would have already been discussed. They're already responsibly cited thanks to the solar mapping tool. And hopefully the legal reviews of these solar projects will be much smoother and much faster if users are using the solar mapping tool ahead of time. As I mentioned, we are hopeful that the solar mapping tool will be replicated in other areas of the state and in other areas of the country. We are streaming lots of data layers from lots of different sources. And again, they're all publicly accessible. So if you can make a story map, if you're on the Esri platform, it should be very easy to recreate this tool for other areas. And we did create a replication guide to help anybody, GIS users who want to replicate this tool in their region. So this guide, is also available on HowToSolarNow.org, and it kind of walks folks through sort of what to think about and what we were thinking about as we went through the process of developing the tool. So I want to wrap up talking. I know that was fast, and I'm happy to go back and cover anything again, but I want to leave lots of room for questions about either the content, solar issues, or the back end, how the GIS and the story maps function. I'm happy to field whatever questions.
Thank you, Alex. That was great. All right. If anyone has questions, they can put them in the chat box, and we'll make sure Alex sees them. I'm going to switch over to question and answer mode. All right. We do have one question here. About consideration of the aesthetic value of a place when considering the solar panel installations. I believe I know specifically which parking lot the superintendent is talking about. And that seems to be a big trend in Suffolk County, the covered solar parking lots.
Okay. So Generally speaking, we hear this concern a lot. It's a common one, the aesthetic impact of solar. As I mentioned, we do have a siting guide, a guide to sort of best practices for solar siting on the HowToSolarNow.org website. And that really deals with the sort of the how to think about siting issues, and it gives some concrete best practices about screening and visibility and things like that. This is a question we've gotten a lot for the solar mapping tool, but for folks that have done viewshed analyses in GIS, you have to have both sort of the place you want to visualize, and you have to have a viewpoint to do an analysis. And the viewpoints are endless because if you can drop a point on my house and you can drop a point on my neighbor's house, and those are two different view sheds, and the analysis comes up differently, even if we're looking at the same thing across the street as far as putting a solar site there. So there was sort of, it was too analytically complex to do, but we also want to encourage people to sort of re-examine their assumptions and think critically about it. There are a lot of unsightly things that get built, and solar seems to, for some reason, attract a lot of negative attention around viewshed impacts. But in that respect, I'm not sure how it's different from a lot of other things that get built and don't get the same viewshed scrutiny. So there are ways to mitigate viewshed issues, but I think also people are a little bit gun shy of having to look at these things just because they're new, they're a novel thing on the landscape. And I think we've all trained ourselves not to see the power lines that crisscross our landscape, not to see all the gas stations and strip malls that are all over the place. And so I think part of it is sort of just getting used to seeing solar around, but part of it is also good site placement, responsible screening. So it's a combination of things. But specific to GIS, it's analytically really too heavy to give users the capability to drop points in. There is actually an ArcGIS tool that will let users do that in web maps, but it takes a lot of computational power and a lot of Esri credits, which costs money every time somebody does it. And interpreting the results for a non-GIS user also can be a little bit fraught. So we elected not to include that capability.
Okay, next question. Why did you choose to use the classic story maps app as opposed to the new one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the simplest and most honest answer is that I already knew classic story maps when this project started, now 2 years ago. I think at that point, the new version of story maps was fairly new. It was certainly new to me. And the way we wanted to structure this tool lent itself to some of the existing classic story map templates really well. I think if I had to start now, I would certainly delve into the new story maps platform more. We're hopeful that this tool is going to last through, I think 2024 is when they're going to officially stop supporting classic story maps. So if the tool is still getting a lot of use, then we'll think about recreating it in the new story maps. But it was really a question of my prior experience and knowledge about what could be done as we were thinking about how to develop this thing.
Okay. Who in particular is expected to use this tool? So, was this government agencies, individual people?
Yeah, I think we want to hit a fairly broad spectrum of audiences. Certainly at the forefront of our thinking was municipal stakeholders. So this is both professional planners, but also volunteers on town planning boards, town zoning boards, town conservation commissions, things like that. We also wanted to target solar developers as an audience. In talking to them, we found that a lot of them look at solar feasibility first, look at that hosting capacity map or the transmission lines. And sometimes things like wetlands, natural resources, agricultural resources are a bit of an afterthought. So we want them to be fully aware of where these things are and what they might want to be thinking about as they're thinking. We don't want them just looking at the hosting capacity maps, but looking at the full picture, as we want municipal stakeholders to look at the full picture. and hopefully get everybody on the same page. We are also seeing some government use. We've heard that NYSERDA, which is the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, I think is what that stands for. They are using the solar mapping tool to help them identify sites that are really appropriate for solar. They're actually piloting, or they have a program now as part of the new Climate Act to identify sites that are suitable for solar, and to basically do all of the permitting and site permissions work ahead of time, and then auction that project off to solar developers. So they're really trying to push responsible solar development and take care of the red tape for developers. And so we know that they're using the solar mapping tool as well.
Cool. All right. So do you have a layer that shows the public lands owned by local and state governments?
We do. Let's see. I'll actually try to, let's see. If I can manage to share my browser window without messing things up too much here.
Just turn off the Q&A.
Okay. Hopefully folks are seeing the tool itself now on screen.
I can see it. Yep.
Okay, great. And so here you can, I'll just briefly touch on, we're in part 3, which is one layer at a time. And the way this works, and another advantage of using the story map templates that I used, so this is actually set so that users can zoom into their town and they get walked through land cover, but then the map stays zoomed into their town as the layers flick on and off, and they can kind of zoom in and out and explore. And these are clickable. I've filtered which attributes they're seeing and formatted them so that they're in plain English, because so often attributes are not. So they can kind of zoom around, and the map will turn on and off the appropriate layers, but stay to the extent that they've chosen. And on the side here, we have this sort of navigation help. So if you hover over these dots, you can skip to a section. So what I want to get to here is our protected areas layers. This was a bit of a tricky one. We are using the US Protected Areas database, as well as New York State locations on the National Historic Register. And so you can click on these and get info about each place. This is not as comprehensive a data set as we would have liked, but there are not actually, we couldn't find better layers to use that were more both comprehensive and up to date. The Protected Areas database, I think it goes by PAD US, even though it's the US Protected Areas database, relies upon landholders submitting their GIS data to that data set. So there are holes in it, and we know there are holes in it, but we had trouble coming up with a more comprehensive data set. We're actually working with a bunch of other partners in the Hudson Valley to further develop the Protected Areas database of New York, NIPAD, so that is a more comprehensive data set that we could swap into the map here, but that's still a work in progress. But these data sets are decent, and they do show a lot of both local, state, and nonprofit protected lands.
Do you happen to have the link handy so people can open up the tool themselves while you're showing it?
Sure. There is a caveat. The tool requires registration, which is just putting in an email address. And then the main reason for that was actually in order to be able to stream the hosting capacity data from the utilities, they required us to register users and be able to access the list of emails of folks who are accessing their data, although they haven't actually asked me for the emails yet, and the tool's been live for a few months now. But so there's a one-time registration process. It sets a cookie in your browser, So you can register, get the cookie, and then you're in. And I'll put the main address here is HowToSolarNow. That will route to our HowToSolarNow page, which links to the solar mapping tool and our other solar resources. That also has the replication guide on there.
Great, thank you. See, we still have time for more questions if anybody has anything else. I'm just curious, how long did it take from, you know, beginning to production to put something like this together?
I want to say 18 months. But that is all encompassing. So we sort of had a rough idea of what this might be. We brought in some municipal stakeholders who we work with a lot, and who are familiar with us and we're familiar with them, and sort of pitched the general idea to them and got feedback. We then came up with the more extensive stakeholder groups, and we did listening sessions with them where we sort of presented the idea. For, say, the municipal stakeholders, we sort of just pitched this idea and asked them how we could make it more useful to them. For the other groups, like the conservation group and the agriculture group, we actually came to them with a specific list of layers and said, which of these do we need to put in? Which of these could we afford to take out? We started developing this thing in one story map. We got feedback that it was too much in one bite, so we broke it up into 4. We pilot tested it with the towns as we were developing it, and so there was a lot of back and forth. So that 18 months is sort of from start to finish.
Okay.
We worked with Scenic Hudson's graphic designer to figure out all the styling and make it as readable as possible, as digestible as possible. So there were a lot of steps involved in the development. I think you could, if you just wanted to put up a story map and stream these layers, you could do it pretty quickly. But to get our finished product, to hone the text, to figure out what we wanted to say about each of these layers is really where, and the iterative process of working with stakeholders, I think, took a lot of time, but was well worth it.
And I love that you have the replication guide available for other municipalities. That's awesome.
Yep, so here's our homepage again. This will take you through to the registration page, which again is very easy and painless, I promise. We did also record a demo for general users. I think probably GIS users may not need to watch it, although there's some nice introductory info from NYSERDA. And then here's the replication guide link. That's on our main HowToSolarNow page, right here.
Do you happen to know if anyone's actually used this in a siting process since it's gone online?
We, as I mentioned earlier, we know that NYSERDA is using it to try to identify those ideal solar sites. Other than that, I'm not aware of somebody who's applied it. The town of Chatham is currently working on their solar zoning, I believe. And so they were one of our pilot communities, and we have chatted a lot with them about the tool and solar zoning issues. And so I think they would probably at this point consider the tool a reference, but maybe haven't actually plotted things out on the map. Although we did identify some solar sites in Chatham just based on, while we were testing the mapping tool, they kind of got really into it. I've learned that if you show people a map, they'll immediately try to figure out where they are on that map and where the things they know are on that map. And so we were meeting at Town Hall and actually figured out that right behind Town Hall is an old mine site that might actually be pretty good for solar.
Awesome. All right. Is there a layer that shows where the solar and other power plants are now?
There is not. That's a great question. NYSERDA maps that to some extent, and they do have a web mapper, but to my knowledge, there isn't, again, a comprehensive layer that shows all of the solar projects in the state of any size, really. In the Hudson Valley region, there haven't actually been any utility scale solar projects approved yet, although there are a couple going through the review process now that sound like they are going to go through. But so there aren't large scale solar projects in the Hudson Valley yet. And the small scale ones are going up fast and furious. Rooftops, community solar, a lot of municipalities are already targeting their landfills, which is a great place for solar, and those are going up quite fast. And I'm not aware of anybody that's comprehensively mapping them.
All right. I don't know if you want to put your last slide back up that had your contact information.
Sure.
It seems like the comment or the questions in the chat have slowed down.
Okay.
All right. So if there's no other questions, that was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much, Alex. This video will be up on the GIS Association's website and YouTube channel, hopefully next week, um, where you can rewatch it again if you missed anything. And for those association members out there that might have ideas about presentations they'd like to see in the future, the Professional Development Committee is always looking for people to volunteer for presentations like Alex did. So we rely on our members for a lot of that.
Yeah. Well, so thank you everybody for listening today, and thanks to the GIS Association for hosting.
All right. Have a great day, everyone.